Paul, of course, speaks for Jesus. You know that. If you're hearing the words of Paul, you're hearing the words of Jesus. Jesus did not say everything while he was alive. In the days of his flesh, he said a lot of things, but after he went to heaven, as he did at the right hand of the Father, his ascension, he then spoke through Paul. And later, Paul is very explicit. I'm free and I'm a slave to nobody. I'm very free. He enjoys this wonderful freedom. But Paul, nevertheless, has made himself a servant to everyone in order to win more people for the gospel. Here's what Paul did. Here's Paul's very subtle and clever policy, and it should be yours too. To the Jews, I became like a Jew so that I could win Jews. To those who are under the law of Moses, I became like someone under the law of Moses. Even though I, Paul, a Christian and a Jew, am not under the law of Moses. Please note, he does that for policy reasons, so that I can win those who are under the law, that's Jews. So then he says, am I then without law? Of course not. He very quickly explains himself by saying in verse 21, he's not without law. It doesn't mean Paul is lawless. The whole point of the New Testament is you are to listen to the words and the teachings. I repeat, the teachings of Jesus. And so Paul says that he's within the law of Messiah. If you haven't understood the difference between the law of Messiah and the law of Moses, you haven't got a good handle on how the entire Bible works. And it can be a tricky subject. No need at all for you to keep the weekly Sabbath on Saturday. No need at all for you to keep the food laws of Leviticus 11. Those are part of the law of Moses. Absolutely no need for you to have your male children circumcised. You could do it for medical reasons if you want to. That's another subject. But for religious reasons, absolutely not. Don't even imagine that. Because once you start talking about the law of Moses being in any way of obligation for you, whether you're a Jew or Gentile, you're making a colossal systematic error. May I say, life and death one. You've got the wrong Jesus if you're advocating the law of Moses, which is now obsolete. That's to say, the law of Sabbath keeping, holy days, new moons, and all of that, and food laws and physical circumcision. Finish with this text, which makes it so clear. If any of this is difficult for you, reread the book of Galatians, please. Paul said, if I were still preaching circumcision, which I'm not, please note, Paul, a Jew and a Christian, was not preaching physical circumcision. He said, if I were, why in the world am I being persecuted? And Paul was being persecuted for this very subject we're dealing with here.
Some people who want to follow the Torah or the law of Moses, parts of it or in whole, however they understand it, they take an exception at the biblical phrase law of Moses. I've heard it a couple of times now. I've debated this matter 3 times now in a row. It's a bit of an overkill, but it's such an important topic. Let's remember that the law of Moses phrase appears 20 plus times in the scriptures. In other words, it's not a made up phrase from myself or Sir Anthony. 20 plus times the law of Moses in scripture. It's the law of God, they say. That's why they take exception. It's not that Moses created it. Moses didn't come up with it. It's the law of God. Well, we all know this. So I'm still baffled as to why some people in that community, as I refer to them as Torah keepers or wannabe Torah keepers, they take exception at that phrase as if, first, it's as if it's not biblical, and second, as if we don't know that God gave the law to Moses and Moses gives it to the Israelites. We all know this. Now, it should be of interest to them. The fact is that apart from Paul explicitly saying there, 1 Corinthians 9, Paul explicitly says in verse 20, I myself am not under the law of Moses, that is, in verse 20. Paul goes on to qualify that statement, as you have noted, Anthony, to say that he's obviously not lawless, because that statement, I myself am not under the law, sounds outrageous on its first hearing. But that's why Paul goes on to, as I put it, qualify the statement. But that doesn't mean I'm lawless. You note there straight away in verse 21, Paul says, it's not like I'm without the law. However, I am not outside the law of God, but bound or under the law of Messiah. This is interesting. So now the law of God is the law of Messiah. Now, the law of Messiah is not Moses. So the point here is that for Paul, the law of God now equals a different law. Look at there. It's right there. Verse 21. The law of God is the law of Messiah.
No, I say that's absolutely right. And if anybody's in any doubt about this, they need to ponder it. A very, very serious trick has been played on the translation here by some. Where Paul there, as you correctly read, Paul said of himself, I am not under the law of Moses. They said, oh no, it doesn't say that. I'm not under the penalty of the law of Moses. That is completely adding to Scripture. Don't even imagine that.